I want to welcome everyone to the 41st annual Caroline Thompson Memorial Lecture. Um, this was actually in the making for a while with Dr. Munoz. I talked to him pre-COVID about coming to do this for us, and that would have happened in the fall. And then, as everyone knows, the whole thing kind of had to get rescheduled. We were delusionally hopeful that we could have him in person, and we have instead gone ahead and planned to have him share with us now, and then also come back hopefully next fall and do what we also love to have Caroline Thompson lecturers do, which is come and consult with us and talk with students and do some other things. So super grateful for that. But I wanted to give a little bit of background about what this honor is and who Caroline Thompson is. Most students have heard us talk about her. Anyone who is an alum here would know about her, but it's just important that we honor who this memorial lecture is honoring. So she was the founder, one of our early founders of our Madison OT program. She was actually the coordinator or program director, as we would be known now, for 31 years. She wasn't the very first one, but within a couple years, and then she stuck. And she stayed for 31 years and went on to be a professor emerita of the occupational therapy program. She actually lived to the hardy age of 95 and was just an amazing, from what I hear, I didn't have the pleasure of ever meeting her, but really a phenomenal support in establishing us as the kind of strong program that we have been. And one of the things that she did that I just recently heard at our alumni party, Zoom party that we had for during AOTA conference, was that when she heard we were needing some more support for students to do research, she made that funding available even as a retired person. Mary Schneider shared that. And that's, you all heard Tim Mark share his research, and many of our PhD students have gotten full fellowships for a year that allows them not to have to be a TA, not to have to work in other ways, but to focus only on their research. So the more I've been in this role as program director, the more I've appreciated what she's done for us to support our educational program, to support us being, a long-standing contributor to our profession. She, at no surprise, coming from UW-Madison, published many, many articles in her 31 years with us, and was highly involved in both the state organization and the national organization. And she just modeled what a graduate of UW-Madison should be. Another thing that was kind of fun is to hear a little more about her. What I understand, again, from a few of the alum that actually studied with her that were at our alumni party, is that she was someone who was really good at gathering people together. And she was very quiet, kind of unassuming. You wouldn't immediately think of her as a leader, but she somehow quietly just kept bringing people together and bringing the right people together to make things happen. And this is just a few older photos to show what it looked like back when she was in leadership there. She was also seen as a visionary, really always thinking towards the future of what could OT be doing, where should they be involved. She just, no question about it, was someone that was pushing our profession forward into the future. And she, was a part of graduating many, many, many groups of students. I am thinking of bringing back these little jumpers for you all, so you can let the next cohort know that that's what everyone's going to be wearing. And just to give you a little sense of what just a rich, long history we have, the OT program started in 1943 at the bachelor's level. We had a whopping 150 OT students enrolled when Caroline Thompson started. her leadership role. We, in 1985, began to offer a master's degree, that advanced master's. In 2005, along with most of the rest of the profession, we began to offer the entry-level masters of OT. And then starting in a few weeks, we will be at entry-level OTD. So this cohort, who's just done a phenomenal job doing their presentations and poster sessions, will be our final MSOT graduates when they finish all their training. So with that, this is an honor that we have been awarding for 41 years, and we are delighted that Dr. Muñoz has agreed to present to us. I had fun digging around a little and getting to know more about him. Interestingly enough, he probably doesn't know this, but he had just left UIC. I think he taught at UIC for a time. And I started teaching there. So he was a kind of legendary person to me, because everyone talked about how amazing he was as a teacher, and that nobody wanted to present after him because he was so skilled at, the students all loved him. He always got all the awards. And I was like, who is this guy that everyone just raves about? I think a lot of it was Craig Veloza raving about you, Jaime. So but anyway, so I'm predisposed to like him because I just heard all these positive things. But I wanted to give you a little bit of background about him. He is currently, at least for another 50 plus days, the chair at Duquesne University for 55 more days, not that he's counting. But he is the chair and an associate professor at Duquesne University and in occupational therapy. He, like me, got the entry-level bachelor's degree and looks like went on to get he got that at Kansas University, and then went on to get an advanced master's at University of Illinois at Chicago. And then apparently liked studying so much that he kept going and got his doctoral degree at Pitt, at University of Pittsburgh. And some interesting thing, his area of focus, early days were pediatrics, but has for a long time been really focused on mental health and even more so community practice and community issues around justice. And we're going to get to hear a lot about that today. Another side note about Dr. Muñoz is that he is married to an OT and has a whole bunch of other folks in his family line, a daughter, a sister, and a niece, I think I read, who are also OT. So it's like a family business. So anyway, just join me in welcoming Dr. Jaime Muñoz and joining us to share on the topic of occupation as catalyst in justice-based practice. And we will have time afterwards to have him answer some questions, hopefully a pretty leisurely amount of time. So be thinking about what else you might want to ask him. You can feel free to put those in the chat as we proceed. So I'm going to let you share, Jaime, and I'm going to stop sharing. All right. You figuring it out, or do you need help?
Hello, everyone. Sharon, thank you for that fantastic presentation. A little unnerving to hear all that. Just looking to see if I can share my screen, and I'm having a real hard time getting out of the view to do that. I don't see the bar on the bottom.
Okay, you don't know. Oh, maybe you lost host status?
I just upgraded him from co-host to host, so.
Okay, and you've got share screen?
Yes.
Or do you see it?
Not yet.
If
Okay.
you hover over the bottom of your screen, does it pop up when you hover there?
Maybe it's my Mac, but I'm.
Stop insulting Macs. Jaime.
Hey, I'm a longtime Mac user, but this is a brand new one, and I'm paying for it now. I can't even get out of exit full screen right now. So my view will only allow me speaker and gallery.
I don't know. I'm not even a co-host, and I just clicked and it would allow me to share.
Yeah, all I'm saying is I don't have that
Yeah.
bottom line showing up on my computer right now.
Okay. Well, do you want to send it to one of us and we can put it on?
I'm gonna have to do that. I think everybody can take another bio break because this is gonna take 5 minutes maybe. I'll
Okay.
try to send it through email, but I have a feeling it's too big.
It's possible that on your version of Zoom, your taskbar is up at the top of your screen versus the bottom.
I do have a taskbar up there, but it's not giving me the option to share my screen.
Okay, well,
Sorry.
we got a brain trust here, and one of our faculty suggested you log off and log back on and see if that helps.
Let me try that. I'm gonna leave and
You know, I'm a fan of turning something off and turning it on. That frequently is the problem. Although the tech guys I call always ask me, have you turned it off? Have you turned off your computer and turned it back on? I'm like, yes. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Looks like we have some wonderful attendees. Thank you all for joining us. I see Barbara, Frank Cronenberg. Thank you, thank you. Hi, Barbara. Anyone's pets in the background? I was going to welcome all the pets that attend, are well informed. I heard Becca's cat earlier, I believe.
Yeah, my cat likes to make frequent appearances in
Back in the day when we used to have OT meetings, you'd see a lot of OTs would be knitting and crocheting during the meeting. I made this card.
Nice. Nice. All right, this looks promising. I see a screen. Was that from you, Becca?
It is not.
Okay, what? But I don't see Jaime. Oh, there you are, yay!
give me a second.
No worries.
The joys of the world we live in.
I
now.
know, we all have to be very, very flexible.
How are we looking there? Can we see me?
Yes.
You're looking good. We can see you and your screen.
Oh, technology, gotta love
All
it.
right, I'm gonna have to give Carla Ostro the shout out. That was the brilliant suggestion.
Okay,
Log him back in.
thank you everyone for staying so long and getting me through this little bump as we start with technology. Thank you, Dr. Gartland. That was a gracious invitation. Congratulations to all the winners. Jessica, what Dr. Brown said about, fieldwork educators, could not emphasize that more. I'm jealous as I've listened today to the post-professional OTDs, some of the master programs, the presentations today. I'm jealous of your clinic. I'm jealous of the folks that you have there. Truly impressed by the caring culture that seems to be a part of the program and the OT family there at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So kudos to all of you. I'm humbled to be allowed this platform at the Carolyn Thompson Lecture platform. Dr. Gartland shared some of the folks that have given this lecture, and several of my mentors were on there, so I'm a little nervous about that. I know our time is short, so I'm gonna get started. This is my goal. I'd like to lead us here. As Dr. Gartland said, if you have questions, comments, you want to share some thoughts, you want to disagree, please put them in the chat. I'm sure someone will help monitor that. I'm going to try to move fairly quickly, show more images than text, and try to speak to those. But here's my plan. I'd like to begin with talking a bit about some demographics, get a broad context of what's going on in justice-based practice. I'm going to dwell a bit on injustices in the system, in our criminal justice system, structural injustices, systematic injustices, institutional injustices. I'll share some examples of occupational therapy practice, where I think we can be, and emphasize this concept throughout about occupation being a catalyst. Before we start, though, it seems appropriate that we share space talking about justice and justice-based occupational therapy, that during this time in our nation history, when we're awaiting sentencing for the murder of George Floyd, that we take a moment. Any joy in this one decision really belies the relentless grief and outrage that so many of us feel at the nearly daily announcements of killings at the hands of law enforcement officers. We've seen 6 people shot fatally in the 24 hours right after George Floyd's murderer was convicted. We've seen children be part of that. Adam Toledo, Ma'Khia Bryant. On this screen is an incomplete list of names of people that have died at the hands of police in 2020. The list doesn't include at least 44 transgendered or gender non-conforming people who were shot or killed in violent means during this year. It doesn't reflect the trauma that is engulfing our country as we see a nearly 150% increase in anti-Asian hate crimes. For all of this, I think we need to begin with a breath. So I ask you, if you're willing to bow your head for a minute, close your eyes, take a deep cleansing breath, and let's honor and remember those who've been lost to hate and violence. Thank you. Please continue to hold that space in your minds and love in your hearts for everyone and anyone who's affected by trauma and violence, including yourself. So I'm going to start with the big picture. I'm going to throw some numbers at you. I'm going to throw some charts at you, set a demographic context for our discussion. So we're number 1, yay! And it's not even close. Worldwide prison populations have grown by 24% since 2000. The prison population rate internationally is 145 per 100,000. In the United States, it's 645 per 100,000. So the incarceration rate per capita in the US, 645, is about the same as the rates of Spain, China, Canada, France, Austria, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, and India combined. The US is also among the world leaders in terms of imposing punitive sentencing, extended solitary confinement, life sentences, including with juveniles, and executions. Personally, I believe that Ernest Strucker has it right. He's a public health person, and he says very convincingly that mass incarceration is a public health crisis in the United States. Give you a minute to take this in. This pie chart is kind of showing you how many people are locked up, about 2.3 million in the US. And these folks are in jails, in state and federal prisons. And generally speaking, a jail is a place where people await trial, await sentencing, or they're incarcerated for a minor crime, usually something 1 year to maybe 23 months a sentence. People who are convicted of more serious crimes, murder, drug trafficking, robbery, etc., they're going to be incarcerated in a state or a federal prison when it's a federal crime. So the main points I want you to see here is that says a lot of people. But I also want you to focus on that purple circle around the jail number. Nearly 3/4 of these individuals who are sitting in jails are not convicted. They're awaiting sentencing, they're awaiting a trial. The challenge is that they're arrested. They don't have the means to pay bail or to remain out of jail until their trial. So in your mind, what I'd like you to think of is think of a number. Think of a number that you think represents the median bail for a felony in the United States. Now, felony is a crime that if you're convicted, you're gonna spend at least a year in jail or prison. So think about what that number is. Median bail. If you said $10,000, you hit it on the nose. Where I live in Allegheny County in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, it's $14K. Here's another chart. I'll give you a second, process this. Now I want you to direct your attention to that gold triangle. This is that entire pie from the previous slide. All the people who are incarcerated in US facilities. Now I want you to think about the rest of the pie here. It's twice as many people. People on probation and paroles and other type of restrictions are ultimately facing situations where their occupational participation is impacted, sometimes significantly. So this is my first take-home point in this couple of slides. In most nations, the role of criminal justice system is to protect society, to prevent a criminal from repeating a crime, to punish a person for their behavior. Rehab is unfortunately a very distant secondary goal in most jails and prisons. I don't think there's a nation in our world that can boast that their criminal justice system substantially reduces crime. Maybe some of the Scandinavian countries. Incarceration is a particularly ineffective method of rehabilitation. It usually has a negative effect on a person's future employment. It destabilizes families. It can devastate whole communities. Incarceration, probation, and parole all restrict occupation. The specific restrictions can be freedom of association, freedom to move from place to place across the state line, freedom to vote, eligibility for certain housing, employment, and educational opportunities or eligibility for educational grants. So my argument here at the beginning is to tell you that I believe our society as a nation is diminished by our excessive use of jails and prisons to address problems that have multi-layered social disadvantage as a component of them. My argument is that these justice-based systems need occupational therapists. They need us to help transform our nation's justice system to be a system that can offer a person a clear opportunity for treatment and rehabilitation. And I believe that catalyst is occupation, that catalyst is doing. Okay, so switching gears here, I want to talk some about some injustices that create this overuse of incarceration. So my next arguments here are that systematic injustices in healthcare, in education, in housing, systemic racism, these all converge within the walls of justice-based settings, and they contribute to our overuse of incarceration for social control in our country. So let's take a look at some of these injustices. You've all seen, I think, slides like this before. 1 out of 3 Black boys born today can expect to go to prison in his lifetime. 1 out of 6 Latinos compared to 1 out of 17 white boys. In general, Men and women who are Black, Indigenous, people of color are more likely to be arrested than white people. And once arrested, they're more likely to be convicted. And once they're convicted, they're more likely to face a stiff sentence. That's not my opinion. These are facts, and they're borne out by clear statistics. So for example, a significant 2028 study found that in state prisons, the incarceration rate for Blacks is 5 times higher than it is for whites, unless that Black person lives in Iowa, Minnesota, New Jersey, Vermont, or, don't shoot the messenger, Wisconsin, where it's 10 times higher. The same study found that half the states, and there are 12 states where half the state prison population was Black. In Maryland, it's 3/4 of the population. Women are disproportionately, women of color, I should say, have been the fastest growing incarcerated population in the US over the past 40 years. Like their male counterparts, women of color are incarcerated at higher rates than white women. Women are more likely to be incarcerated for nonviolent crimes, property offenses, public order offenses, drug offenses. And incarcerated women have histories of victimization and trauma at much higher rates than incarcerated men. Interpersonal trauma, sexual trauma, domestic victimization, PTSD, these kinds of traumas. Let me talk about another pipeline. Black, Indigenous, and people of color are often traumatized in their own communities and schools, and there's a direct connection between this trauma and incarceration. It's a well-known fact that the impact of adverse childhood experiences impacts adults' mental health and their criminal justice involvement. It's a very well-established fact that children of incarcerated parents are 5 times more likely to be exposed to an adverse childhood experience than their counterparts without incarcerated parents. There's a growing body of research that is illuminating the ramifications of punitive school environments and disciplinary practices on kids' long-term well-being, their mental health, and unfortunately, their involvement with justice systems. So these studies are really demonstrating that as we've increased the presence of school security and school resource officers, as zero tolerance policies have proliferated, and as schools are increasingly using exclusionary discipline as a method, this is just creating a pathway right from school into the justice system. So that top causal factor right now is exclusionary discipline. And by this, I mean school suspension and expulsion. So think for a minute, what kids do you think are most likely to experience exclusionary discipline? It's estimated that upwards of 80% of youth in the juvenile justice system have been suspended from school, and over half have been expelled. And these experiences of being excluded are associated with increased risk of arrest, incarceration, and self-reported offending and reoffending. So punishment in the form of exclusion from schools falls disproportionately on Black, Indigenous, people of color, youth, males, trans, and gender non-conforming youth. Another pipeline. Justice-involved youth are characterized by higher rates of victimization when compared to non-justice-involved youth. The victimization is often in the form of cumulative trauma. So there's a staggering number of girls in the juvenile justice system who've experienced sexual trauma. The demographic has been described as the sexual abuse to prison pipeline. So these trauma histories are complex, but a common kind of theme amongst incarcerated girls. So the constellation of challenges related to this trauma can be a dysfunctional home environment, a coercive sexual environment, emotional abuse, sexual, physical abuse, or witnessing violence. The sexual abuse to prison pipeline is disproportionately comprised of girls of color and girls from low-income communities. It's not hyperbole to say that our juvenile justice system criminalizes girls of color because they have experienced multiple and intersecting forms of trauma, including trauma that results from structural forces of racism and poverty. One last pipeline. Youth placed in group homes are 2.5 times more likely to get involved in the justice system. Black children are twice as likely to be placed in foster care than white children. Youth with 5 or more foster placements have a 90% chance of entering the justice system. Who do you think those kids are? LGBTQ plus youth are most likely to be subjected to multiple foster placements. Many fosters have the police called on them by their caregivers, often for some kind of infraction of rules. So I think you can see a parallel from to the school prison pipeline here, if you think about it. I mean, what I mean is that the ramifications of a punitive home environment and punitive disciplinary practices can have the same effect of introducing the young person to the justice system, the same kinds of practices that are used in school. The foster care to prison pipeline particularly affects youth of color, LGBTQ plus identified youth, and young people with mental illness, all of whom are already likely to be in foster care and more likely to be pushed into justice systems. So my argument in these slides has been that systematic injustices in healthcare and education and housing and systemic racism converge within these walls of schools, foster care system, justice-based settings, and that these injustices contribute to the incarceration for the overuse of incarceration for social control in our country. So when I'm talking about systemic racism here, I'm not limiting the scope to white and black. I draw instead on the work of Professor Ramon Grossfogel. He's a Puerto Rican sociologist at Berkeley, and his definition discusses racism as an act of dehumanization, acts that are ingrained in the very fabric of our society. I'll give you a minute to take a look here. A global hierarchy of superiority and inferiority along the line of human that has been politically, culturally, and economically produced and reproduced for centuries. I think this lens of humanity and dehumanization is a critical lens for us. Our South African and other global South colleagues, Dr. Elewani Ramangundo, Dr. Frank Cronenberg, Dr. Wagner dos Santos, Dr. Sandra Gallego, among several others, have been putting this lens up for us in the United States to look through for many years. And I'm hopeful because I see more and more of us taking a look through those lenses. I think thus far I've kind of walked in spaces that and shared lenses that most of us use, that most of us recognize as familiar: numbers, demographics, research findings that are related to these justice-based populations. In the next slide, I want to invite a couple of folks to push us to look through lenses that may be less familiar, less comfortable. Perhaps you've already listened to Kimberly Jones's viral video, "We Can't Win." In it, she uses this analogy of playing Monopoly to effectively make her argument and lay bare some layers of oppression that have occurred in our nation, in the way that we built our nation. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and Miss Becca, I'm going to quit sharing. So if you'd play that piece from Kim Jones' video. Fair warning to everyone, Miss Jones speaks with force, she speaks with passion, and at times she curses. But I tell you, every time I watch this video, every time, it just takes my breath away. So I apologize if that offends you. But Miss Becca, would you play the clip between 2:35 and 5:11, please?
Mhm.
What they need. And then people want to talk about, well, there's plenty of people who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and got it on their own. Why can't they do that? Let me explain to you something about economics in America. And I'm so glad that as a child, I got an opportunity to spend time at Push where they taught me this, is that we must never forget that economics was the reason that Black people were brought to this country. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. Do you understand that? That's what we came to do. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. Now, if I right now decided that I wanted to play Monopoly with you, and for 400 rounds of playing Monopoly, I didn't allow you to have any money, I didn't allow you to have anything on the board, I didn't allow for you to have anything. And then we played another 50 rounds of Monopoly, and everything that you gained and you earned while you were playing that round of Monopoly was taken from you. That was Tulsa, that was Rosewood. Those are places where we built Black economic wealth, where we were self-sufficient, where we owned our stores, where we owned our property, and they burned them to the ground. So that's 450 years. So for 400 rounds of Monopoly, you don't get to play at all. Not only do you not get to play, you have to play on the behalf of the person that you're playing against. You have to play and make money and earn wealth for them, and then you have to turn it over to them. So then for 50 years, you finally get a little bit and you're allowed to play. And every time that they don't like the way that you're playing, or that you're catching up, or that you're doing something to be self-sufficient, they burn your game. They burn your cards. They burn your Monopoly money. And then finally at the release and the onset of that, they allow you to play and they say, okay, now you catch up. Now at this point, the only way you're gonna catch up in the game is if the person shares the wealth, correct? But what if every time you share the wealth, then there's psychological warfare against you to say, oh, you're an equal opportunity hire. So if I played 400 rounds of Monopoly with you and I had to play and give you every dime that I made, and then for 50 years, every time that I played, if you didn't like what I did, you got to burn it like they did in Tulsa and like they did in Rosewood. How can you win? How can you win? You can't win. The game is fixed. So when they say, why do you burn down the community? Why do you burn down your own neighborhood? It's not ours. We don't own anything. We don't own anything.
Thank you, Becca. I don't know. Wow. She's talking about generational trauma from multiple intersecting systemic, structural, and institutional injustices. She's making the argument that the game has been fixed for a long time. Becca, will you please prep the next click? I want to do a short setup here. My colleague and friend, Dr. Levon Fox, has schooled me on the doctrine of discovery, which provided the framework by which Christian explorers could lay claim to territories not inhabited by Christians. This circles back to Professor Grosselfogel's definition of racism as dehumanization. By labeling people as less than human, the dominant culture can rationalize oppression. Professor Grosfugel says that dehumanizing ways we have, that we have treated each other has been politically, quote, politically and culturally and economically produced and reproduced for centuries by the institution of the capitalist, patriarchal, Western-centric, Christian-centric, modern colonial world system. So I want to introduce you to Mark Charles. He's going to share a lens to look through that some of you maybe have not peered through before. He's argued consistently in his career that throughout history of the United States, we the people has never meant all of the people. He's a Native American, Navajo by descent, and he has fervently denounced the doctrine of discovery and the Dakota Access Pipeline. So let's listen to him.
13th century, that in the 1400s we have the writings of the papal bulls saying things like invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever. reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, convert them to his and their use and profit. This papal bull, along with other papal bulls written between 1452 and 1493, collectively became known as what we call the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is essentially the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, wherever you go, whatever land you find not ruled by Christian rulers, those people are less than human, and the land's yours for the taking. This was literally the doctrine that allowed European nations to go into Africa, colonize the continent, and enslave the African people. They weren't fully human. This was the same doctrine that let Christopher Columbus, who was lost at sea, land in this new world that was already inhabited by millions and claimed to have discovered it. If you think about it, you cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. If you don't believe me, leave your cell phones, your purses, your car keys out in front of you. I'll come by and discover them for you. That's not discovery, that's stealing. It's conquering. It's colonizing. Because to this day we refer to what Christopher Columbus did as discovery, it reveals the implicit racial bias of our nation, which is that people of color, Native Americans, are not fully human. This makes the doctrine of discovery a systemically racist doctrine that assumes the dehumanization of people of color. Now, the challenge with this doctrine is that over the years it became embedded in the foundations of our nation. So in 1763, King George drew a line down the Appalachian Mountains, and he said to the colonists that they no longer had the right of discovery of the empty Indian lands west of Appalachia. This upset the colonists. They wanted access to those lands. So a few years later, they wrote a letter of protest. In their letter of protest, they accused the king of raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. They went on in their letter to state that he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages. They signed their letter on July 4th, 1776. Literally 30 lines below this statement, all men are created equal, the Declaration of Independence refers to natives as merciless Indian savages. Making it very clear, the only reason our founding fathers used the inclusive term all men is because they had a very narrow definition of who was and who was not human. This, of course, makes our Declaration of Independence a racist document that assumes the dehumanization of people of color. Now, a few years later, our founding fathers wrote another document. They began this document with the words, "We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility." This, of course, is the preamble to the Constitution of the United States of America. However, in Article 1, Section 2, the section of the Constitution that determines who is and who is not included, who is and who is not covered by this Constitution, A, it never mentions women, it specifically excludes natives, and it counts black people as 3/5 of a person. So literally, the Constitution was written to protect white landowning men. We have to stop for a minute and pause and wrap our heads around that. The purpose of the Constitution, as it was written, was to protect white landowning men.
Becca, let's stop it there.
We act surprised today that
I'm just conscious of our time here. Becca, maybe you can put the links to that, these two links in the chat for anyone who wants to listen to them. Mark Charles goes on for an hour, and Kimberly's is about 15 minutes. But my take-home point from this part of the conversation is that, from my perspective, when we consider justice-based institutions through a lens of intersecting oppressions, I think of the strong, resilient social forces that both Kim Jones and Mark Charles are talking about here, that they've interacted together to sustain racism, which in turn limit economic opportunities and sustain bias connected to biological difference, socioeconomic class, ableism, gender and sexual orientation, patriarchy, citizenship, immigration status. These aren't my own thoughts. This is kind of where I'm coming to by absorbing the thoughts of so many others. But to be clear, racism is at the core. Dehumanization is at the core. These forces deny or restrict access to positions of power and authority in the US. And my argument is that these intersecting oppressions can, at minimum, be ideological, institutional, interpersonal. They're alive and well in US society. But the influence is bidirectional. So I think that we as occupational therapists can act to address these oppressions and ask our own questions. So I'm going to switch gears here again and quickly talk about the history of occupational therapy in criminal justice systems within our own profession. I'm going to do this by sharing a scoping review. I do this for a research team that included Dr. Abigail Catalano, Dr. Inao Wang, and Ms. Jacina Phillips. So the top part of this slide here reiterates talking points that I've already made. And the bottom part really kind of looks at where occupational therapy, generally speaking, has said, this is how incarceration and our justice system is impacting aspects of occupational performance for people involved in the justice systems. So my team and I, we set up to do this study, and this was what our intent was. Those of you who know a scoping review, it makes an effort to assess what is known. Well, we were very grandiose in this, and we really wanted to know everything that we had ever really written about occupational therapy literature. We weren't the first to do this. Mountain did it in 1998. O'Connell and Farnwell did it in 2007. More recently, Hitch and her colleagues looked at about 25 studies in 2016. Our effort was pretty ambitious. It was grandiose. We wanted to look at the published work that was published in English to try to comprehensively say, where's occupational therapy been and where can we go? So our intent was to do this scoping review as a way to provide a baseline so that the hopes that good people like all of you who are listening can take the next steps. So the structure was, as O'Malley and Artsy have defined. We searched CINAHL, we searched PubMed, we searched Scopus in September of 2019. We didn't apply a language restriction initially, but when we found something that was written in another language and couldn't find an English translation of it, we didn't include it. So that's only due to the linguistic limitations of us as researchers. There's a lot of good works out there in other countries that did not make our cut. We used EndNote and we used Covidence to organize the task. We screened almost 700 articles, 676 articles after we deduplicated. Reviewing those reduced it significantly to 362 articles. Reviewing those reduced it to 139, which became our sample. We categorized 74 of those as studies and 65 as non-studies. Now, keep in mind that these were over a span of 75 years. So characteristics of a study early on had the things that walked and talked like a study, but weren't necessarily things that would get published today. So bear that in mind. In step 4, we used iterative qualitative code recode processes, analyzed and categorized our sources. And in step 5, we summarized it in a way to be able to portray our results. And these are those results. So again, about evenly split between studies and non-studies. Within the studies, the vast majority of them, 80%, were from the UK, the US, or Canada. And they tended to focus on these 5 areas. Studies that looked at the population characteristics of the people that we were working with. Sometimes, and much less so, they studied, well, do our interventions have an impact. Some of the studies explored some of the various processes that we used, including assessment processes. Some of the studies audited our OT practice, and by that, I did one of these myself. It was a survey, so asking people, what are you doing? What kinds of practice models are you using? What kinds of assessment tools do you use? What kinds of groups do you run? Those kinds of things. A special issue in the Occupational Therapy International, and then the Journal of the Annals of International Occupational Therapy has both of these. And then finally, and most often, we were asking service users what their perspectives was of occupational therapy practice were, or interventions were. The non-studies tended to be older studies, written, in the first of those 75 years, not completely, but much older studies in general. And in these studies, you can see our structure here was to say, some of them were looking at assessment and intervention processes, again, not in a structured, systematic study kind of way, but just more descriptive way. And this was maybe 20% of all the non-study sources, looking in a broad range of settings. The group and program descriptions were just that. All kinds of groups, everything from vocational rehabilitation to addressing the needs of those convicted of sexual offenses. The role of occupational therapy in justice-based settings. This was another large population, maybe 25 or so studies, or non-studies, I should say, 25 sources. They're looking at the role of OT in all kinds of places, from prisons to jails to forensic mental health to welfare hotels, all kinds of places. And then finally, there was this smaller set of studies that looked at applying an occupational therapy lens to criminal justice, to crime itself, to violence, to these broadest concepts like occupational deprivation and occupational enrichment, and they were all focused on a justice-based setting. So very quickly, I know that's fast, but these are the takeaways. For 75 years, we have been demonstrating that we have a role. We haven't crystallized it, but we have a role here. The research in the last 15 years has just gone out of the roof. And these are stronger and stronger studies. They're showing that we can use occupation to address skills. And in particular, think about this. Most of the people that are in prison now and jail now, they're going to get out, the vast majority of them. Now, unfortunately, a lot of them go back, but everybody is going to experience re-entry. And if they didn't have the skills to stay out of jails and prisons before, who's best to teach them and work with them to develop the kinds of skill sets and motivational mindsets to stay out of criminal lifestyles? I think that there's an untapped source, because every time I look at a set of presentations at conferences, I'm seeing these that are focused on justice-based systems. They don't make it to publication oftentimes, but there's a whole raft of them. I think, as others have said in the past, the other reviewers that I mentioned earlier, we need outcomes research in these settings. Finally, there are models that can help us organize. We don't have a set of practice guidelines for this particular setting, but we do have models like MOHO, like the Canadian model, like occupational adaptation, that people have used quite effectively in these settings to address the occupational needs of people in these settings. Here's the source. If you contact me through ResearchGate, I can help you, hook you up with a copy if you can't find it in other places, and if you're interested. So just search me there. Okay, I'm going to switch gears really quickly here. Try to give you some examples of a few places where I think that we are acting as a catalyst in justice-based settings. All of these that I'm going to share very quickly here are appear in the citation below. It's in Dr. Katana Brown and Dr. Ginny Stoffel's second edition of occupational therapy and mental health. And these folks are all colleagues of mine and allowed me to share these. Kathy Kaminsky, working in a prison. She has a unique job as a health officer in that prison, and she does a lot of things that I think most of us would say are traditional mental health kinds of skill building and working on, in her case, reintegration into the community. Brittany Jackson, a fairly recent grad from St. Louis University in SLU, working with Karen Barney and others there, working in a jail. There's a jail in nearly every small city. I mean, they have populations, they have needs that occupational therapists can address. Brittany worked a lot with a variety of folks there, and I think it's one of the mindsets we as occupational therapists need to switch to think about. We're used to working with PTs and speech language pathologists, and in these kinds of settings, we're working with social workers more often. We're working with parole officers. We're working with prison guards. We're working with prison wardens. We're working with judges. We're working with lawyers. There's a lot more a differentiated workforce. This is one of the oldest occupational therapy programs in juvenile justice in the nation. So Google OTTSF and the occupational training program. This is my colleague, Christine Hayworth. Their program has been around for a long, long time, focusing on not necessarily always adjudicated youth, but many of these children are in those school to prison pipelines, in those sexual abuse to prison pipelines, and they're trying to keep them out of finishing that part of that pipeline. Lastly, Jessica Salazar Cedillo. Jessica started an OTD program. During her OTD program, started this juvenile leadership program, which had a strong mind-body mindfulness, meditation, emotion regulation kind of component to it. Diversion is a great way for us as occupational therapists to try to act preventively in our justice system. Keep them out of incarceration. Do it in community where people have the opportunity for more authentic occupation. Okay, so that was fast. Sorry. Occupation as catalyst has been my argument. I opened the presentation with this as my title. I'm closing it now. A catalyst is an event. A catalyst can be a person that causes change. First step in making change is understanding that change is necessary. And I hope today I've convinced some of you that change is necessary in our judicial system. Our judicial system, in my mind, is broken, and we can do so much better. Our society can change so that we're not the #1 nation incarcerating its citizens. And I believe occupation can be the catalyst for that. I believe occupation can keep youth from becoming justice-involved youth. I think occupation can prevent a returning citizen from reoffending. I think OTs and OTAs can be agents of change. Many years ago, Elizabeth Yerxa wrote a piece in Dr. Gary Kilhofer's book, Health Through Occupation. And her contribution was called Audacious Values, the energy source for occupational therapy practice. Our values as a profession are grounded in that every person is human. Every person has dignity. Our values can help us be that transformative force in justice-based settings. I believe occupation can be transformative in the lives of individuals and the culture of institutions if we're willing to do the work. So I'll end with this slide because as Amanda Gorman reminds us, it's not going to be easy, and justice can't be just us. We're going to have to make noise. We're going to have to challenge some norms. And with that, I end my part of the presentation and open up for any questions. And I'll remind you of this. we are very powerful people. We are audacious. We can do this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Munoz. I really appreciate, and it's sometimes hard to hear the reality of it, but I also resonate with I think something you said about the workforce. There's an eagerness to want to be part of bringing about change. And I'm going to kick us off with just having you, what do you think will connect this kind of, especially this generation, and I know you work with students as well, that this whole generation of students is passionate about justice. And what is it that we're missing for connecting this passion to actually plugging in OTs to these kind of roles? What do you think we need more of, or what can we be doing from an educational standpoint?
I mean, I think you hit it on the head. We don't need to convince people. I mean, I think, occupational therapy students here at Duquesne, just as they are at University of Wisconsin in Madison, they come with the same value and belief that people have dignity. People are human and should be treated as human. It's not about disability. It's about diffability sometimes, how they're different, but we don't have to convince them. What we do have to do is I think equip them with the skills. And I'm still wrapping my head around this. So these ideas are half-baked, but several years ago, Carolyn Baum, I think, was doing her, I don't know if it's a presidential address, but she talked about, knocking on doors. We got to kick down some doors, okay? Knocking is past that time. We really have to put ourselves out there. We have to present ourselves as capable in these contexts. And we have to demand a fair wage. So I think that I guess I would ask, Dr. Garland, you and your faculty, are we training students to think as businessmen and businesswomen? It's changing a perspective of why I'll bet most of the students on this talk today thought about why they wanted to become an OT. Everybody tells you some variation of I wanted to help people. I knew I could help people. I connect with people, and I think I can do this. And I like a lot more what OTs are doing than some of these other health professions. But we need to be able to do more than be helpful. We need to be able to articulate to funders. We need to be able to articulate to program directors. We need to be able to take the jobs of people who are running organizations that are providing community-based health. And by that, I don't mean, inoculating for COVID. I mean, people who are providing social health services within our communities. There is in every state, in every city, in every town, a Department of Health. How many occupational therapists do you know working in them? And having the capacity to share a vision of what occupation does for people's health with those kinds of systems. Now, I'm sure some listening now are going, wait, that's not why I wanted to become an occupational therapist. I guarantee you, if you can get to that point in your thinking, you may never feel more like an occupational therapist than being able to make that kind of difference in the systems that are all around us. So I think we need to train a certain way of thinking. I mean, I'm not disparaging, quote unquote traditional occupational therapists or therapy settings. I'm only saying that we can be both. And I know that there are many amongst this group of people here who that twig is already bent. It's going to grow that way. If it has the skills and it has the knowledge, those students will take those positions. But we have to equip them with the right tools. And I think some of those tools are marketing tools. some of those tools are business school tools. And yeah, I think we need to do more of that. And I think the OTD allows us to do that even more.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, we've got all sorts of great comments going crazy here in the in the chat, which is awesome. Let me grab.
I'm just looking at Amanda's question. Amanda, you want to rephrase that? How do we effectively get into a prison? What are you thinking about there, Amanda? Don't go there. No, I think I know what you mean. Every place, every city, again, I'm sure Madison, there are any number of groups out there already meeting and talking and doing work with people who are coming out of prisons, work with trying to prevent people from going to prison. Get involved in those groups. Don't just talk to occupational therapists.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to a variety of healthcare providers, a variety of social service and social health providers in a variety of contexts, and make them have this moment with you where they turn to you and go, how did you learn to think like that? What are you again? And that's when you do your whole OT spiel. And you tell them, I'm an occupational therapist, and we look at people like this, and this is how we're trained, and this is what we do. You want to have as many of those conversations as possible, but you want to be in the spaces where people will ask you, how did you learn to think like that?
Yeah. Well, I want to be cognizant that we are actually past our ending time. I am feeling increasingly excited that we are not done with you, that we're going to fly you back out to at least consult with us as a faculty and with our next group of students. And maybe we'll have to think about opening up some more discussion. I can literally see the excitement coming through these chats. I think you've tapped into something core as OTs, in that all of us did this, that idea of every person is human, every person has dignity. And I think we long to impact those things and make a difference with our training. And often we get sort of beat down, not figuring out how to move towards that place. And so I was thrilled to have you be our lecturer. I knew it would be a soaring challenge. To take a good look at what we're dealing with in our world, which is painful and hard, but also the hope of what part we might get to play in addressing some of these systemic injustices. So I thank you for your just your voice in that process. I know you are one of those that just over and over and over again challenges us as a profession to think about what role we can play. And we look forward to hearing from you and the wisdom and experience and passion you bring to how we can be part of training OTs to see where they might step in more into the community. So thank you to everybody that has joined us. Yeah, just can't say enough. I mean, I feel like I wish we had hours to keep going. So we'll have to think about how to work with you. And thank you to all the students. I know you were probably a little tired after presenting your poster sessions, but thanks for hanging in with us. And just what a delight to dream a little about what we might be about in the future. And I appreciate your shout out to the OTD, because I really do believe that as challenging as the arguments pro and con about OTD, I really do believe that it gives us the space to equip future students to have the kind of entrepreneurial skills and just leadership skills it's going to take to really wade in there and make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you again for the invitation. It was very gracious, and I'm humbled by the opportunity to talk with you all. Thank you, students, for staying as long as you did. I know it's been a long day.
Yeah, and thank you to all our alum and community partners. It made me tear up when we were giving out the award. Just you have no idea how grateful we are for the partnerships we have within. And I know Dr. Muñoz agrees. Boy, we couldn't do it without all the therapists out there helping us train our students. So thank you, thank you, thank you.